A little better? Still can't hear me? Is that any better?
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's try this. Like I said, technology is great till it's not. How about that? Can you hear me a little bit better? Not at all? Why don't they make these omnidirectional? How about that? Better? Can we get a little more volume, Pastor? Try it one more time. Technical difficulties. All right. That's still not. All right, I'm going to talk really loud. So, welcome back. Those of you that have been coming back, thank you very much for that. If you weren't here, Monday we spent talking about grace-filled communication, grace-filled speech, and the power of words. Yesterday we talked a lot about more philosophy than the how-to, but talking to people who are different from us, because that's challenging. Today we're going to talk about generations and communicating with different generations, because there are generational differences, are there not? How many of you have children? How many of you have grandchildren? Anybody got great-grandchildren? Nobody? You got great-grandchildren. Awesome. So I'm going to guess that you could go to your children and there's a communication difference between you and them, and then from them to the grandchildren and them, and they're all different. They got a different thing going on. Today is going to be a little different, and I have a favor to ask. I love that we had some fantastic discussions yesterday and Monday. Today is a lot more informational, and I need to give you some building blocks for how the rest of the week is going to play out. Thursday, we're going to talk about what our churches look like to outside people. And then Friday, we're going to talk about how do we speak this out to the world. So it should be a nice wrap on everything. But today is very information heavy. So I'm going to ask would you let me give you the presentation? I've not my preferred method of doing things, but I need to give you these building blocks for where we're going to go the next 2 days. And then I'm going to try to carve out some time at the end so we can spend some time talking. Fair enough? Awesome. Let's go. We're going to talk about something that affects every church, every family, every Sabbath school, every church board, and probably every dinner table. Communication between generations. And it was about 12 years ago when Pastor Jeff was preaching that the light bulb went off in my head that this was a thing in churches. And the more I started studying it, the more I started understanding how big a thing it really is. I'm going to lovingly tease every generation today, because I think every generation has some really neat stuff and some really not so neat stuff. So bear with me. That's all said in the best of humor, I promise. I would ask if you would join me in a real quick prayer before we launch. Heavenly Father, every generation in this room was shaped by different experiences, different struggles, and different worlds. Please help us all this afternoon to not merely tolerate one another, but to truly understand one another so that our words reflect the grace, patience, and the unity of Christ. I ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Does anybody know how many generations are alive on planet Earth right now?
7.
I hear 7. Anybody got a different answer? 4. 5. The truth is, we have 8. We have 8 generations alive on planet Earth. I cannot prove this, but as a a pseudo-social scientist, is my belief, I don't think that's ever occurred in history, except back when people lived for 500 and 600 years. So it's an interesting time to be here. And I'm going to introduce you to all the generations, but bear with me. Here's something important to understand. There's 117 years from the beginning of the first generation that's still alive today until the one that's just started today. 117 years. My question to you is, how much has the world changed in the last 117 years? How much has the world changed since 2020? Right? Things can't stay the same. We're all moving through time together, all these different generations. But the problem is on this highway, everybody's in different places. This is dependent on how you researchers divide them, but there's the GI generation. If you've read that book by Tom Brokaw, it's called The Greatest Generation. That's it, the World War II generation. There's a few 100,000 of them left. All of them are 98 years old. The youngest of them are 98 years old. Anybody know somebody that's GI generation that's alive? Then we have silent generation. That's my parents. We have baby boomers. I'm going to guess large representation from baby boomers in here. We have Generation X, Millennials, Generation Z, Generation Alpha, and at the beginning of 2025, social scientists introduced the Generation Beta. We've now run out of things to call them, so we're just going to go with the Greek alphabet, apparently. I'm sorry, they could have given Gen X a better name than that. But I want you to imagine something. Is it feasible that all 8 generations could be in the same church at one time? It absolutely is. How's that going to go? I think it should be fun. It doesn't always go that way, though, right? Everybody, think about how remarkable that is. Okay, you have somebody in the room, might have somebody in this room right now that remembers World War II. Somebody that remembers the moon landing. Somebody that remembers cassette tapes. Somebody who watched the internet arrive during high school. Somebody who's never known life before smartphones. And now we have a generation that's coming up that will never know life without artificial intelligence. They will never know life before that. This is an important consideration. Honestly, it's amazing we do as well as we do with it. How many of you grew up before color television? How many of you remember rotary phones? How many of you remember life before the internet? How many of you have grandchildren that can do technology better than you can? All right, let's think about this 117 years for a minute. I want you to think about the monumental changes that have happened during this time. We had electricity, generally available electricity, automobiles, air travel, radio, television, computer, the internet, smartphones, and AI now. That is a lot of change. My mom has plowed fields with mules. Literally, that's a true story because she was born during the Depression. And it's a really hard thing for me to wrap my head around. I contemplate this often. I'm like, wow, how hard is it for my mom to have embraced all of the things that have been like freight trains of change coming through over all those years? That's a lot of stuff. Okay. I want you to imagine with me, if you will, that all our generations grow up on a different planet. Pick any planet in the solar system. It doesn't matter which it is. The only one you can't have is Earth. Earth is uninhabited. Okay? Every generation is growing up on its own planet with its own experiences, its own education, its own culture. Everything that was happening in your world growing up is happening on 7 other planets. On one planet, the children were taught to never question authority. On another planet, the children were taught challenge the system. How many of you were raised to never question authority? I was moderately raised that way. Silent generation is called that for a reason. How many of you raised children who questioned everything? One planet expected everybody to go to work and work at the same company doing the same job for 40 years. Another assumed that careers, technology, and culture would be a constantly changing thing. Do you know that now, where if you were on the job market today and you work at the same company for 40 years, that's going to be a mark against you? Because they're going to view that as that your career was stagnant and you didn't have exposure to a lot of different things. That is not the world I grew up in. Stability was it's a whole nother animal there now. One planet feared world wars and nuclear destruction. Another fears isolation, anxiety, losing connection in a digital world. One planet believed institutions like government and churches were trustworthy. And another grew up deeply skeptical of all of those things. And those children that are growing up with artificial intelligence, that's going to shape daily life before they experience it. Think about that for a second. Can you hold it till the end, sir? Absolutely. I want to talk, but I got a lot of information to share. And there's a lot of participation in this. So go with me, sir. I value what you have to say. You know this by now. Okay, here's what's going to happen. This big spaceship is going to come around to all 8 of our planets and pick us all up together. And it's going to take us to Earth and drop us all off together. And to make it worse, we're only going to have one church where we're all going to get dropped off together. Now, whoever's in charge of all of this says to all of us, now understand each other perfectly, agree on communication, agree on technology, agree on worship styles, agree on politics, and agree on definitions of respect. How's that going to go? And how real does all this sound? It's amazing we do as well as we do. This is how the conversation seems to go to me. Young people are alien invaders who are coming in to destroy everything. If you're a young person, I do not say this bashingly. I'm just telling you this is how the conversation goes. I'm going to throw one at the older folks too. Us older folks, we're dinosaurs. And all we want to do is tear everything down and take it back to the way it used to be. I actually had a gentleman come up to me in one of my seminars that said, when is everything going to go back to being normal? And I said, okay, define normal. And he explained he really wanted things to go back to kind of the world he grew up in. I'm like, I'm sorry, sir, that world's gone. It's gone forever and it's never coming back. Now, here's the point, folks. Some of you might have a hard time with this, but not one generation is wrong or right. But they are so wildly different from each other that, boy, you'd think it was so. Everybody on the planet has been shaped radically by the worlds they grew up in. And it may as well been we grew up on another planet. I have to credit my wife for coming up with that. She said that to me one morning and the light bulb went off in my head. It's exactly the way to describe it. Everybody had different experiences, different fears, different assumptions, different communication styles, different technology, different ideas of what respect even looks like. And we're going to explore some of that today. And one of our greatest Christian responsibilities is learning how to love people whose experiences we don't understand. That's hard. Let me say this clearly. Every generation tends to believe we're normal. Everybody else is not normal, just us. Our generation is the best. Were you in here yesterday? I should give you one of my name tags. I wish I'd have brought them. Every generation tends to believe we're normal and everybody after us got weird. And every generation does it. And this is actually something I can prove. But let's start with respect. That's a hot button topic right there. I did one of my seminars at one of our churches here in this conference, and we were talking about Generation X that day. We weren't even talking about millennials, but he got up at the back of the room and gave us, what's the right word? A soliloquy? He gave us a long speech about millennials and how their problem was they had no respect for each other. Okay, so I want to tell you this. I've been researching generational science for about 12 years now. And I frequently do seminars and I'm an invited speaker to talk about this. And it's one of the things I do for my company is try to figure out how do we connect our customers who tend to be older with our service people who tend to be younger. And that usually ends up with lots of challenges there. I tell you that to tell you this. I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people personally. And the first time a millennial laid this out for me, I have to confess, I could not argue with them. And you might not agree with what I'm getting ready to tell you. I want to ask you a question. How many of you were raised to believe that you had to respect your elders? Please show your hands. Everybody look around. Now, how many of you were told by the same person that you had to respect your elders, you had to earn their respect? Raise your hands, please. Look at how universal that is. Okay. So this millennial sits down with me and I'm asking questions and we get in the topic of respect. And he goes, okay. He said, I'll spell it out for you. And he was really nice and polite, very respectful. But he said, you mean I have to respect you only because you're old? That's the only reason. No other reason given, just because you're old. And I have to earn your respect. But you can't tell me what that looks like. You can't tell me that I have to do A, B, C, and D in order to qualify to earn your respect. You'll just let me know. Isn't that kind of how it works? And I went, wow. So it sounds kind of like a double standard, doesn't it? Now here's why I'm telling you this. When you encounter this from somebody from the millennial generation and younger, that's how they define respect, because they believe that respect is an automatic two-way street. When I interact with you, I'm going to automatically give you respect, and I expect to get respect until we teach each other that it's not time for that anymore. And that doesn't exactly line up with respect your elders in the traditional sense, does it? It's okay if you don't agree with that. I've had people in my seminars angrily get up and yell at me about that. But it's the truth. It is. I'm not comfortable. I was raised in that world, I'll give you something to cry about. Y'all know that what I'm talking about. That was my world. You better be respectful to elders. But when I think about that logically and just simply how that looks to somebody that didn't grow up in the same world that I did, okay, I have to look at it through that lens for a second. I want you to know they absolutely do believe in respect. I very rarely run into young people that don't have respect, but how they show it is so different from what us older people. For the record, I'm 61. I'll be 62 in September. Yeah. But don't slow down. I'm right behind you. And so I have to often stop and look at this through the lens of, okay, what's wrong here? Am I really getting this interpretation of this was wrong? And so this is something that we have to take into consideration. Now we get to Judges 2:10. There arose another generation which knew not the Lord. And this is not a new problem. Boy, the Old Testament's full of this, isn't it? There arose another generation after them which knew not the Lord. Somewhere, truth stopped transferring. Somewhere, relationships weakened. Somewhere, communication broke down. Somewhere, the older generation stopped effectively reaching the younger generation, and somewhere the younger generation stopped reaching back. It doesn't lie with one generation or another, it lies with everyone. And the result is that an entire generation drifted spiritually. This is true today, is it not? Absolutely. If this is left unresolved, it fractures relationships, it weakens discipleship, it slowly damages the spiritual health of the church. And as someone who works with church revitalization, I can tell you this is a tough fight to fight. We were just talking about this earlier. Trying to revitalize a church is way harder than planting a new one. It's way harder. And that's not a cut on anybody. That's not any disparaging remark on anybody. It's just how it works out. And it leaves us, that's not sociology I'm talking about. This is true discipleship. This is what breaks down. And it leaves us we're unable to fulfill the mission that Jesus left us with. So, I would like to clear up some generational misunderstandings. Let me start with this one. Oh, wait a minute. I got ahead of myself here. I'm going to get to this one. This is the thing we want to talk about right here. Now, I'm asking you to be honest because I'm going to raise my hand first. How many of you said this? Man, nobody wants to work anymore. I have said this. But there's a problem with this. So these are newspaper clippings dating back to 1894. And if you read them, nobody wants to work in these hard times. No one wants to work. No one wants to work. No one. In other words, our grandparents were saying that about us. And I want you to put this in perspective for a second. Every single generation grew up with lazy people. You know, you went to school with them. You work with them. There are lazy people. And sadly, the lazy people get noticed first when it comes, especially to our generations, right? They get seen first, right? So therefore, all Gen Xers are slackers. Anybody ever been called a slacker? It's a misunderstanding. And these are actual newspaper articles, folks. Your grandparents said this about you. Maybe the figurative you, not the literal you. I saw some of you kind of elbowing each other already about some of this stuff. Have you ever been in your lifetime misunderstood by an older generation? In your lifetime? Most of us conflicted with our parents when we were teenagers, right? Because when you're like 15 and 16, you know everything. Just ask you. I was that kid. Absolutely. You conflicted with your parents. I saw you nod. That's a common thing, is it not? That's a generational difference. And you're looking at your parents going, would you please get with the times now? And your parents are looking at you going, yeah, but I already made that mistake. I'm trying to keep you from making it. And the message never connects. But it can, folks. It absolutely can. Now, generations are not identical. There's absolute there's absolute differences. They're not just generational. Culture comes into play. Somebody mentioned on Monday about different personality types. There's so many variants to this. But generational tendencies do tend to run more or less true. Now, let me say this. I can take you to a baby boomer who, in my opinion, is a raging millennial. I can take you to one of my kids, I won't say much, but he is probably as boomerish as it gets. He's such in his way of thinking and the way he views the world. There's exceptions to all of this. And that's why I'm telling you this. So if I'm describing things, this may not be you. It's okay. I can tell you this. For example, if you grew up in a rural area, anybody? You probably tend to be more like the generation before you than the one you were actually born in. Because you've probably looked at the people around you your same age and go, what are you guys thinking? I don't want to be associated with that. If you were raised by your grandparents, you probably have the same phenomena. You will likely tend to be more like the generation before you than your own. And historians and sociologists did this yesterday. Sociologists. They've observed that generations are often partially shaped by the pressures and fears of the world that raised them. So if I look at my mother, for example, who's a child of the Great Depression, anybody ever have the relative that saved the aluminum foil and cleaned it and folded it up? That's a behavior left over from the Depression. And if you think about, because in our world, you're nodding your head emphatically. You knew the person, right? And in our world, that's like the craziest, nutty behavior ever. Would you please stop doing that? You can just go down the store and get some more. But in their world, you would never get another piece of aluminum foil. We still call it tin foil. It hasn't been made out of tin since, I don't know, the 20s, I think. Anyway, we thought that was crazy behavior from our perspective, but for them, they carried on everything. I can tell you this, when my grandfather passed away, there were barrels of the old tractor oil that he kept, barrels of it, because he was afraid the Depression would come again, and he could use that to run the oil heater. All of the mule-drawn implements, all of them were oiled, cleaned, and in excellent condition the day he died. They were hanging out in the barn ready to go because he was worried they'd have to go back to doing that. He didn't trust banks. He didn't trust them at all. He had this big footlocker that looked like it came off of Captain Ahab's ship somewhere with this big, huge antique padlock on it. And they had a really hard time getting it open. But in it were 4 envelopes for my mom and her 3 sisters with $4,000 cash in each envelope because he didn't believe in putting things in the bank. That's a generational difference. If you think about it like this, let's see where we are here. Who in here, was anybody in here born before 1946? If you are, please raise your hand. Okay, so you're silent generation. If you were born from 1946 to 1964, would you please raise your hand? Okay, we're baby boomers. But I was born in 64. I'm on the very last, call us cuspers. We're on the edge of one. And I grew up with a bunch of Gen Xers. So I have a little bit harder time connecting with, I have a little bit of boomer side. There's really some cool things in the boomer generation. But I kind of think and feel more like an Xer. So if you hear me make the comparison, I'm not talking out of both sides of my mouth. Big sword. To 64. Yeah, if you want all the years, I'll give them to you right now. I've been doing seminars about this for 12 years now. And anytime says, what are millennials again? And I forget every time. I have coached myself for this for 12 years, and I lose it every single time. Okay. If you were born between 65 and 1980, please raise your hand. Y'all are Generation X. Is anybody in here from 81 to 1996? Millennials. Millennials, I promise there will be no millennial bashing in here today. I love working with millennials. Millennials know how to be on a team. Gen Xers, and I'm claiming my Gen X side, not so much. We don't play as well with others. Generation Alpha, my granddaughter here. Generation Alpha is from 2013 to 2024. And Generation Beta started in January of 2025. Did I skip Z? Sorry. 1997 to 2012 is Gen Z. If you can figure them out, Gen Z is actually fairly easy to work with, but getting the code is the key. And it's not easy to do that. So I'm not disagreeing with you, but you can work. You can work with that. 1939 to 1945. Now listen to me, folks. When you Google this depends on which research organization you go to. I always go to Pew Research Center. That's my default one that I use for this particular thing. So feel free, if you go to University of Southern California at Berkeley, they got a whole nother thing going on. There's a university in Europe that they've got a whole nother way of defining it. That's okay. I think generally it's based on shared behaviors and attitudes. It isn't about the year. It's about shared behaviors and attitudes. This is why I say I can take you to people that I know that were born in one generation, but they think and act like they're in another one. And that is not uncommon. Silent generation. We have a couple of silent generation in here. Silent generation was shaped by stability, structure, institutional loyalty, and personal responsibility. Silent generation was the group of children that were taught that they were to be seen and not heard. Silent generation. And then if you go back in history and you look at McCarthyism and when that all hit and your job and your future, and some people even got thrown in jail over that whole, they called it the Red Scare. That was a reinforcement. The silent generation people, okay, I'm going to duck my head, keep my mouth shut. I'm not going to buck the system. Most silent generation tend to be a little less likely to talk about things like political views and religious views and stuff like that. They're not going to be as outgoing about it. That's not universal, but it tends to run that way. Many from this generation have quietly carried churches faithfully for decades without needing a word of recognition. And I think that generation deserves honor for carrying our churches faithfully the way they have for so many years.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Where's my baby boomers again? The vast majority of us in the room tonight. Okay, boomers, we have a problem with I'm going to claim my boomer side right now. We have a problem with us. You have to think that between 1954 and 1964, there were 10 million babies born in the United States every single year. Do y'all remember school overcrowding in the 70s in the public schools? It was on the news all the time, right? Oh, say I'm a kid for that. There was 4 kids around our desk. 4. And that was normal. And the problem was the system wasn't designed to handle this big boom. After World War II, what did we send? 3 million men, 600,000 women across the oceans to fight 2 wars on 2 fronts, basically. And then they all came home and we passed legislation making it easier for them to get education and home loans. And everybody started raising families. We had an economic boom. Baby boomers start growing up. Baby boomers are the last generation in American history to grow up in a two-parent home where dad makes the living and works outside the home, mom stays home and raises the kids. The last one. By the time people my age and older started coming along, both parents were working outside of the home or they were divorced. Do you think that changes our culture and how we see things? Okay, so for baby boomers, they're who the people are. We were who the people were. And everything in America wrapped itself around our generation. Marketers loved us. Go back and watch television commercials from the 70s. If you don't believe me. Marketers loved us. Retailers loved us. Politicians loved us. We were the people that voted for them. Everything in American culture wrapped itself around the baby boom generation because that's logically who the people were. Then, as we got older, we came to an expectation. And we came to the expectation because our life experience taught us it was true. I call the baby boomers the customer is always right generation. But you tell me as a baby boomer, and I'm going to claim my boomer side here, I have been told that my entire life. The customer is always right. And when I go into a business, I expect that. And we get downright upset when we don't get that. As boomers came along, education changed, marketing changed, politics changed, consumer culture in general changed. And then you had a lot of big historical events. Post-war prosperity, television, the space race, economic expansion, the civil rights movement, the women's liberation movement, all of this stuff happened. And it resulted in dramatic social change. By the late 60s, divorce rates started to creep up and got up over 50%. I can tell you this as just a child of my upbringing, most of my school friends had divorced parents. We spent way more time with our friends than we did with our families. So another thing about boomers, we're very we identify our careers with our personality. What we do is who we are. I've seen a lot of heads nod. Because what happens when you open up a conversation with a stranger? What's one of the first questions asked? What do you do? Because what you do is who you are. That's an expectation. When you get down to Gen X and beyond, there's some Gen Xers that are like this. You're not going to see that same behavior. What they do and who they are, they believe are two different things. Whether or not you agree with that, that is the reality that we now live in. And I still got a duty to reach that person for Christ. So what am I going to do with that? Oh, and by the way, boomers, even if it's the customer, we're wrong, we still want to speak to the manager. And here's what younger generations see. Now, this is not a correct understanding. However, if you're standing in their shoes, it looks exactly the way they're describing it. Boomers are confident. Who you are is what you do is who you are. I'm confident in that. I know what I'm talking about. I've walked the road. And when we're trying to parent, it's like, I've already made all these. Let me tell you my experience because I made that mistake before. But I'm going to tell you what the young people hear. They don't hear about the mistake. They hear you saying me and I. And that's where you lose them, right there. Because connecting it beyond the me and I, that's not happening in the conversation because their perspective is different. For us, This is what responsibility and competence look like. But these two generations are perceiving the same behavior through completely different lenses. Completely opposite different ones. Now, let me say something about boomers. Many of the churches we worship in today exist because of baby boomers. Baby boomers have faithfully stayed members of churches, tithed, worked, been elders, been deacons, and you should be honored for that. All right, where's my few Gen Xers in the room? This is stereotypical, folks. Gen X is the second smallest generation in United States history. And I actually read a study from the sociology department at University of California at Berkeley. And it was about generations, and they actually wrote this in the foreword. We chose not to include Gen X in this study because we felt like that they didn't contribute anything significant to American culture. Okay.
And we love that.
Yes. Thank you, sir. May I have another? And so here's how it looks for Xers. We grew up under boomers. Now I'm going to claim my X side for a second. We grew up under boomers. There was no room to disagree. Remember what I said? I'll give you something to cry about. We grew up in the world where corporal punishment was allowed in schools. I have been slapped in the face by a teacher, and it was legal back then. Yeah, and it was okay. So all of a sudden, the schools go from having a gazillion kids down to having the second smallest generation in U.S. history, and that gives you more focus on the individual. And sometimes it really wasn't fun to be a Gen Xer going to school. Really wasn't. So we learn to navigate, but we also learned that we were ignored. Because let me tell you something about my mom. My mom showed up. My dad left when I was really young and didn't help my mom at all. Nothing, zero, zilch. And my mom worked 2 and 3 jobs just trying to keep us with a roof over our head and food on the table, right? So where do you think she was every day? She's at work, keeping us alive. I'm a 4th grader. At home, I'm a latchkey kid. Yes, exactly. Your key is on a literal shoestring. And I'm taking care of myself, making adult decisions, preparing meals, washing clothes, doing chores, wandering around with my friends in the days where there was no cell phones and nobody ever knew where you were. And, and then if you're home and mom's home, because she went through this period where she worked night shifts, so she's home during the day in the summer, I don't want to see you until the street lights come on. Don't dare come home. That's a real thing. That's a real thing. Like us kids, we compare notes. All your parents said that to you. Sounds cruel, but they're like they don't want you underfoot in the house all day. So all the things you see on social media about the kids drinking out of water hoses and all that, that's real. That actually happened. Okay, Gen X tends to value independence and authenticity and practicality and efficiency. So we're way more about function than we are form. Can you see how this might get into the way in a worship service planning with your church board? Gen Xers are going to be about function, not form. Like order of service. Where are we going to put the mission story? I've been on a revitalization Zoom call with a whole church. We had a 45-minute window to talk about some really big stuff. We spent 30 of it arguing over where we were going to do the mission story. It's a real thing. And I'm not kidding about Gen X not playing well with others. It's harder for them to collaborate. It isn't because they're bad people. It's just that our world and our life experience taught to do things solo. I'm that kid. You did things alone because you had to. You made adult decisions. You were doing adult stuff at an age when no kid should have been. And yet your parents were doing the best they could possibly do for you. And my mom was a great mom. Don't misunderstand that. She fought tooth and nail to keep my brother and I afloat and did it. Let me tell you something about Gen X. Do not try to control them. Gen X can detect control and manipulation from orbit. I'm serious. It's very quick. Amp, turn them off. Gen X grew up watching institutional America fail. Think about it. Watergate, the Iran-Contra affair. How many high-profile televangelists in the South got into all those scandals during the 70s and early 80s? It was like, what, 19 of them? Every time you turn around, there was another one. So here's I'm talking about secular Gen X now for a second, but I think this bled over into some of the Adventist culture if I'm reading it right. Okay, I can't trust government. I can't trust marriage because nobody stays married. I don't trust religion because look at these televangelists. It's all right, y'all. If that's the worst thing that happens today, we're doing just fine. Skepticism, sharp, sarcastic humor, these are trademarks of Gen X. And if you're dealing with them, please understand that they're not being rude or disrespectful. It's just they've grown up in a world where they learn to laugh at just about everything in its absurdity. And so you see how that can translate over into very sharp humor. I make fun of everything, including myself, all the time. And I have to back up and apologize to people sometimes because it's just people don't get that, right? All right. And I had some millennials in the room. If you don't mind, one more time, millennials, do you mind showing me where you are? Fantastic. Y'all came along during the age of internet revolution, social media, 9/11, and economic instability, the Great Recession. Now, I've heard people slam millennials for racking up all the student loan debt. But let me defend them for a second. They did what we told them to do. How many of you were taught that the path to success in the United States of America is go to college, get a good education? Go through. Okay. Now, pair that back with there's no longer two-parent homes. How are the kids going to go to school? There's only one way, loans. It's the only way you can do it. My mom would have sacrificed everything to put me through. I joined the Army instead, but I know she would have made sure I went to college if I wanted to. They did what we told them to do. And then when they got done, we were in the Great Recession. When there wasn't jobs in their fields that they studied that we told them to go after. That's a real thing. And we criticize them for it. Millennials always ask why. Gen X was never allowed to ask why. But millennials were a much bigger generation than we were. They outnumbered us. So when they came along, and I don't know what it is about you millennials, but they started hiring consultants about y'all when you were being born. Y'all had parents across the states of America freaking out over what's coming. Don't believe me? Go back and Google. There was a morally safer thing called the millennials are coming because millennials are getting out of high school and college. And it's not flattering to millennials. Let me warn you about that. But it gives you an idea of what the view of millennials were at that time. Millennials ask why. Okay, how many of our churches, the head elder's been there for how many years? You fill in the blank, right? Because we're comfortable with traditions and stuff like that. And trying to fill that roster when it's nominating committee time, that's so easy to do, right? And then a millennial comes along and asks that held elder, why? And a lot of you are laughing because you've seen this with your own eyes. You know what, folks? Why is not a bad thing. You know why it's not a bad thing? Because if I understand the why of anything and you're just like me, if I understand the why, buying into it is a whole lot easier, isn't it? But we grew up in a world where we were taught, you don't ask me why. Because that's disrespectful. Definition of respect is different. Do you hear me? Church, this is a real thing. There's nothing wrong with these. And let me get something clear about millennials too. They're in their mid-40s now. They're middle-aged. Every young person is not a millennial. There's 3 generations after millennials now. I heard this at a professional conference this year. One of the big speakers got up and he started talking about millennials. He was talking about 19 and 20-year-olds. And it's everything I had to go, because I wanted to make that same statement. They're middle-aged now. They've got children. They're homeowners. They're heading major corporations. And we should have turned the church over to them 15 years ago. Here's why. Y'all, I'm not super comfortable with change a lot on some things, and some things I'm totally comfortable with it. But here's the problem. Do you understand why business survives COVID? Does anybody know about why? And how did they change? Technology. And you know who did that? Millennials. If we didn't have millennials in my $156 million annually company, when we suddenly had to, in one day, figure out how to go with all of our training that is state required in 3 states online, because now we can no longer meet in person. We could not have done that. I had never used Zoom in my life. Millennials, y'all saved 2020. Good for you. Do we have anybody who's Gen Z in here? Oh, and let me say one more thing about millennials. You guys are the first generation to spend half of your adult lives trying to recover passwords. Okay, let's talk about Gen Z. I want you to think about this for a second. For Gen Z, the war and terror has always existed. Always. They've never known a world where we were not fighting terrorism somewhere. If that don't make you feel old, I don't know what will. They've never known the world without smartphones, ever. I read a study that the average Gen Z child had a device in their hands from age 6. Okay, whether we agree with that isn't the point. What do they tell you on this thing all day long? Nobody. Oh, you're okay? I think it's pretty cool that you're paying attention and you wanted to look that up. Go for it. Go for it. I'm telling you all the differences of generations because this is a thing in our churches, isn't it? And do you see how easy it is for all of this stuff to not connect? And the point is that everyone's life experience taught them what you expect. And you grew up in a different world than she did, and then he did, and then she did, and so on. We did this exercise yesterday. I asked everybody to hold up their thumbs. You're the only person on planet Earth that has your thumbprint. How can we possibly be alike? And then when we transfer that over, how can I expect you to be like me? Pastor Joe, how can I expect that of you? How's that going to go? No, that's a single point of failure right there. because you don't have my point of reference. How are we doing on time, Pastor?
Oh, you've got 20 minutes.
Nobody tells us good stuff on this. Sensational news is all bad. It isn't. It's true. I love human interest stories. It's the only thing good that's coming out there. Can you imagine growing up that that's your only source? And the old ways of acquiring news and information aren't normal anymore. During all the riots and stuff that were going on during 2020, people were getting their news from people who were on the ground at the event in real time. They weren't relying on the news stations. Because we all know that media tells the truth all the time, right? All the time. We can 100% count on it. So if you're a kid and you're listening to somebody who's watching it and filming it with their phone, telling you what's happening, what's more believable? Right. So your expectation and your interpretation of what you're seeing over here on the news and what's happening on the ground might not marry up. And I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong. I'm talking about how people are viewing the world. Gen Z never known a world where, I haven't forgot you, Frank. We're going to talk. Gen Z's never known a world without school shootings. Number one fear of Gen Z kids is being shot and killed at school. Number one. Father, why do we have to have a world where children have to live with that kind of fear? Do you think that's going to make the kids different from you? I didn't have to grow up with that fear at all. Worst thing is two kids get back out in back of the school and duke it out. Or some kid would sneak out around the corner and smoke a cigarette. That was how bad public school was. I'm going to bet that probably happens in some academies too every once in a while. Ooh. I'm going to hook up my iPad while we're still talking here. I came prepared for this. Do you think that their world looks different from yours? Many Gen Z are very highly relational. They're acutely aware of being connected online, way more than you think. Do they struggle more within interpersonal relationships? Yes, they do, but they crave them. They're very emotionally aware. And here's what's happened to them because of all of those circumstances. Their suicide rates are higher than any generation in history. These kids are killing themselves in alarming rates. You know, and the crazy thing is they don't use as much drugs or drink as much as the generations before them. There's lots of stuff out there. You can feel free to read about it. All right, let's talk about Alpha. These are my grandkids. Generation Alpha is going to become the first generation totally immersed in AI from childhood. Okay, so here was the thing about millennials and Gen Z. We didn't know what a world would look like that had Facebook present their entire lives. Now you do. You've lived to see it. We don't know what Gen Alpha is going to look like in the world of artificial intelligence. Before you bash AI, please try to understand it, because if you're finding yourselves ministering to somebody and that's part of their world, I'm going to encourage you to try to learn to speak the language. It does not think for you. That's not true. If anything, I get brain cramps from how much I have to think now, from how AI has challenged my professional world. I think Alpha is going to grow up to be probably the most brilliant generation that's ever existed, because they're going to have technology and tools that we never had. They're going to have access to information. I published a research paper late last year, and it was amazing. I was telling a story before we started about how I found this one research paper in some lonely small university out in Europe I've never known existed, and it was the key to helping me prove my theory. I would have never have found that in the old system. The Dewey Decimal System did not work that good, and you know it. But Gen Alpha is going to have challenges that we've never seen before, too. And we don't know what that's going to look like either. And we're going to have a whole lot of open heart, a whole lot of prayer, and a whole lot of open mind to figure out, how do we look like Jesus to them? And that's going to be hard, isn't it? But y'all agreed with me yesterday. Jesus' ministry could not have been easy. I can't imagine that Jesus' life and the ministry that he did on this earth was easy. We got to be careful not to interpret difference as a rebellion. Now, and even in appearance and stuff like that. Is that me? That is not me. Don't you love iPhones? We all have the same ringers and the same. You're right. Now let's flip back for a second. If you're GI generation and you're in your late 90s and you're still able to come to church, and I'm a firm believer, because we know Adventists live longer than everybody else, we got to have a few of them. I want you to try to imagine for a second how different church looks for them than it was when you go back to pre-World War II. Take that with silent generation. Ma'am, if you don't mind my asking, you're a silent generation rep. How different is the church look today than the one that you first came into? It's wildly different, is it not? Our church tomorrow is going to look wildly different than it does today. It can be good. I think it depends on what we make it. I don't think things inherently are evil by themselves. I think it's what we do with things that are evil. Human beings, we're the ones that brought sin into the world. It's what we do with them. And I would ask that you at least consider the possibility that the thing isn't evil, it's what we do with it. And that as we're interpreting people that are bringing new and different things, I can prove this to you. Early Adventists were very skeptical of the printing press. They thought it was something from the devil. You're nodding your head. It's true, is it not, sir? They also felt the same way about telephones and radio. Radio was called an instrument of the devil. And it allowed us to reach people in countries we could not get into, but we could reach them over the airways. Same thing with television. Same thing with computers. My wife is an accountant. How hard would your life be without computers now? You hear me, folks? At least consider it. 10 minutes. All right. Let me land this plane. I'm going to open up some time to talk. We focus so hard on younger generations and getting them into church sometimes that I feel like sometimes we leave our older generations behind. I don't think that's an intentional thing. But I want to make sure that I say to all of us from older generations that your value, you bring something to the church that only you can bring. You bring time and distance. Remember this, when you're dealing with a young person, you have traveled this road this far. You've experienced hardships that no one else can identify with. But that young person is only here. And they haven't walked the road you have. Now, we need to help the young people see where the older folks are coming from. And granted, sometimes they're not good at that too. But I think if we could help them understand what we bring to the table, it's probably going to open up some communication doors. But what they get oftentimes is, I'm here on my road, you're here, and I'm telling you, I just don't understand why you don't get this. But I don't have a perspective for getting that because I've never experienced it before. I don't have a point of reference for it. And boy, those young and old conversations get fired up. You know it's true. All right, let's see what we got here. Folks, we can't pretend culture isn't changing. Like it or not, agree with it or not, it doesn't matter. It is our reality. And we have a mission. So that means that our job is to figure out how to make our mission work in our reality. I'm okay if you don't agree with it. I completely understand that. But I do understand that I got a mission that Jesus himself charged us with. The question is, can we communicate eternal truth inside a rapidly changing culture? I believe the answer is absolutely and overwhelmingly yes. Because if we have prayerfully and thoughtfully, biblically approach this, well, I think we absolutely can. Maybe what we interpret as rigidity and rebellion and disrespect or indifference is sometimes just misunderstanding. Honestly, folks, I've tried to confront my own assumptions too. Because even knowing all of this and spending all these years studying it, I still fall into that trap easily. Because I'm human. I caught myself misreading younger people, and I caught myself assigning motives that I didn't fully understand. In other words, I was getting my exercise jumping to conclusions. Told you about that yesterday. Psalms 145:4 says, one generation shall praise thy works to another. This is God's design. Faith was never meant to survive just through institutions. And I'm going to leave you this right here. These are our years. I can bring this up. Let's see if I put this slide in here like I hoped I did. I wanted to make some time to talk today, so I've gotten off script a couple of times, but y'all are an incredibly neat group to talk to. And Frank, I'm dying to hear what you have to say. Hold on just a second. Let me share this one thing with you. This right here.
We lost contact on the screen, so.
Did we? There it is. When Jesus comes, there's not going to be any age. None. How powerful would it be if we could learn to do that here? How much more of our mission could we do if we could learn to do that here? I'm going to end with that. I'm going to close with a prayer real quick, and then I'm going to open it up for discussions. Please pray with me. Heavenly Father, thank you for this group of wonderful people here. Thank you for our willingness to sit back and listen and sometimes disagree. But Father, thank you for opening up the world around us to our hearing so that we can better further your word and complete the mission that you've given us. We love you, Father. Thank you for all of your great gifts and blessings. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to call on Frank first.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say about respect.
Yes, sir.
I believe wholeheartedly, and I was taught this as a kid, that it's okay to disagree, but it's not okay to purposefully embarrass or insult a person over the subject.
I agree.
My mother taught me that, and I'm a what am I?
How old are you?
Do I have to tell you? 70. I'm 72.
72. You're a boomer.
I'm a boomer. But also, I'd like to say that I believe that incorporating biblical principles of communication and interpersonal relationship prepares a person to transcend generational divisions.
Preach, brother.
Yeah.
Preach.
And if you grew up in an AI world, I'll be done here in a second. I think, first of all, your ethics and morality, there's a good chance that they could be fully situational, and truth totally variable.
Yes, but I think you're going to run into that without AI.
Yeah, but I mean, it's going to accelerate to an extreme degree. Yeah,
It absolutely can. I don't disagree. Thanks, Frank. Appreciate that. Who else?
I just have a question about where you get the beautiful pictures that you've been showing. Like that family that was there that smiled all during your service. Was that an AI thing?
That was an AI generated picture. Yes, ma'am.
It's scary.
But I'm also very, very lucky that my company allows me access to our iStock account. And so I'm able to get some of like the videos. That's where I usually get those. But some of these are very situational. Like this one, for example, I needed a picture of every generation represented here with the impression that they're walking into heaven. And I can't find a stock picture like that.
So how do you ask that of AI? What do you tell them? Tell it.
Okay, make me a photo quality image of a group of people representing all of these age groups, and I spell that out. You have to be very specific, and that they're giving the impression that they're walking toward heaven. And in some cases, you can even ask AI, hey, give me some suggestions about this, and you can ask it to write the prompt for you. Tell me how I write a prompt to get this image, and it will do it for you. Wonderful. It's a great tool. Yes.
I grew up, as most boomers did, in an age when the question was always asked, how in the world are we going to get our message out to 8 billion people? You know, the time will come when, and not very far from now, when people will need to know what's really going on.
Yeah, now.
Yeah. AI and technology have given us the answer. We live in an age right now when we can talk to 8 billion people instantaneously with our phones and our computers.
Great.
And we just need to figure out when and in what agreeable manner to do that.
I'll volunteer to be on that committee. Go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Gen Alpha, I think.
Yep, you are.
Anyways, I really don't like it whenever people are like, oh, this generation is doomed and stuff like that, because, and like, oh, these people are so brain rotted and stuff. But it's not that we're brain rotted, because everyone grew up with a different thing, with different cartoons, different kind of toys and stuff like that. And we grew up with this, and people are calling us brain rotted all of a sudden. And we're talking the way that we grew up with, that people around us were like, and so we have our own phrases and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just feel like it's not fair whenever people do that.
Thank you.
Live well.
Yeah, that's coming from a 10-year-old, everybody. And brain rot, that concept, that she's in touch with it. Because, listen, if you tell somebody they're stupid enough, how long is it before they're going to believe you? There's psychological studies that can prove that. There was somebody else that had a comment.
I was just going to say, I heard the comment that our churches constantly change and adapt over time and over as leadership styles change and culture changes and that sort of thing. And someone said, well, is that good or bad? And always we need to evaluate that. Is it biblical?
Amen.
But the real question is that comfortable or uncomfortable? Right? Because if the reason why you don't like it is because it's uncomfortable, however, it is not biblically incorrect, then you really need to stew on that a little bit and decide on what makes sense for your church and the leadership of your church and what you do with that.
Amen. Gentleman over here, Pastor.
I'm wow. I'm generation antique.
Antique.
But over the years, I have thought about some of this multi-generational stuff. I thought when I meet King Nebuchadnezzar or King David, how will I relate to him? Shall I shake his hands? Shall I bow down to the earth?
Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
It's going to be a different world, right? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I just want to try to do two things in one real quickly. So, for my young lady, I'm glad you spoke up, and our young people will speak up. So I'm glad for that. But we, who are their parents, some of us, we contribute to, as she said, we're calling them these things that we created for them. And I don't remember what once, and my daughter said something with the phone, like, it's time for you to get off. And I don't remember what I said to her. And she said, I'm Jamaican by birth. So one of the times she said, I didn't grow up in Jamaica. And then on another time, I think she said, but you millennials are the one who gave us these phones, And so we contribute to a lot of what we are, and I'm not saying it's good or bad. And a lot of times we don't have the time to taper it because everything should be balanced. But again, if we are not doing, or if we are not on top of our game, we're the one who assist them to do what we are accusing them of, or the culture we have created for them. And then we turn back on them with that. But the other thing, as it relates to, not for or against AI, but personally, my identity and my business identity was stolen and has been stolen. And one of the things I'm learning is that AI will, pick up the pictures and everything and compile this for whoever, the bad entities that are using it. So yes, it has its good part, but personally, it's my enemy because of the experience.
And that's 100%.
I have been,
It is. It's 100% so. All of this is personal choice, and everybody's got prayer.
And then the experience. So it has its good. In the medical field, it can help save lives. Absolutely. As it relates to the information that's gained. And so it's that same technique that it's used for the opposite.
Pastor, another question right here. Right here.
Mine is a question. Is there more intergenerational conflict within the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Because we're so, our interpretation of prophecy is, we're so sold on that. Does it have to be just one way of doing anything? Do you encounter that more in the Adventist Church than you would? Because we view the other way of the more Congregationalist church, charismatic churches, they're more open to change. We aren't, because there's something wrong with change. Is our theology part of that rigidity?
Okay, so I've got to answer that from a couple of sides. I don't think it's necessarily more in the Adventist church, but it might be more pronounced because we tend to be more change resistant and less likely to talk about the why than some of secular society is. Asking why in secular society is way more normal. And we struggle with this a little bit. I think most of us will agree with it.
Because we're defenders of the truth.
Well, we're defenders of the truth. But see, I think this is Tim's opinion, I'm going to qualify it as such. I think where we get in trouble with is the defenders. We feel like we have to defend everything. So if you ask me why, I got to defend it. But asking why is not an attack on it. I'm just trying to understand it. And I think that there's a communication barrier there. And I wanted to say something to what Chandler said. That was my granddaughter, by the way.
Just one drum, I think.
Before you start picking on how they talk, go back and look at your own generation and some of the slang words you use. I have a book about this, and it's a collection of slang words over each generation. And some of our slang was way worse than theirs. Just saying. Yes, we had
another one.
Yeah, over here. Did I answer your question at all?
I think so.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Tim, you said you've studied this for 12 years, and you know that every generation, regardless of what it is, has leaders, followers,
Absolutely.
slackers, underachievers, overachievers, and you can keep going. And this alpha generation, they have leaders, followers, that they're the same human beings as we are.
But we tend to lump it into the generational context often. I think it has to do with that road, if you can envision that, because I'm here, you're there, and I can't see why you can't figure out what all this in between is that I don't have a point of reference for yet. And I think that I that's my theory. I think that's where it breaks down.
She'll be a leader. She spoke up in a meeting with a bunch of old folks.
Right.
That's right.
And she's shy. Let me tell you this. So it's pretty cool. Thank you.
Yeah, let's get some of the hands we haven't gotten yet.
Yeah, let's do that.
Mine is more of a question. I don't know if by observation you have seen, having been to several churches in the United States, I've realized that we don't have Gen Zs highly participating in church. They're not present. How can we, as a church, contribute to bringing them in? Because a society I come from Kenya, we have seen that the Gen Zs are actually creating their own churches that are more vibrant to their generation. They say our churches are boring because we are singing from the hymn. They want hymns that are loud. They want, music that is very loud and entertaining to them. So from your point of view, how can we tap into that gap and bring them in? Because you did talk about understanding, but we call them rebellious. The Gen Zs are the ones who have started the rebellion in so many countries, as you can see. In our country, Gen Zs are telling our parents that you never spoke up. So now we are going to speak up on your behalf. You people took loans that we did not ask you to take for us. Now how can we tap into that generation and bring them back?
I actually don't have to tell you what Tim says. I can tell you what Ellen White says, and it's very simple. Meet them where they are.
Amen.
Meet them where they are. Is it rebellious or is it unbiblical? That question that was asked earlier is absolutely right. Well, okay, I don't have to like it, but that doesn't mean it's unbiblical. So I think we meet them where things make sense to them and maybe help them understand why things make sense to you. You want to start somewhere? Be their friend. Be their friend. Don't go in with any expectations whatsoever. I just want to know who you are and what you are. Yeah. That's going to say a lot. Yes.
I work in the world of research. And so we conduct studies, and over time, we find out information about whatever it is that we're studying. And so it's very difficult when we're dealing with the next generation because we've made our mistakes. We've lived our lives a certain way based on the information that we had at the time. And by the time our children or our grandchildren come along, there's been a compilation of data now that they can assess and make a decision on whether that was a good choice or not, right? And maybe it wasn't. Maybe over time has revealed there were mistakes made. How uncomfortable is it when your children or grandchildren sit down with you and say, you did this wrong. You hurt me. The church is doing this wrong. They hurt me. They're turning people away. We don't want to hear it. Our pride gets in the way, right? But sometimes the observations that they provide to us is built on the evidence that they see, and we should listen.
Amen. I think the lady who was first, I see you too. And Frank, I see you as well.
I actually wanted to answer her question because I'm a youth leader, and I'm a millennial. But our small church in South Carolina is comprised of.
If you're going to leave, just go ahead and leave out the side door. The Welcome Center has been closed since 5. So, anyway, we need to kind of wrap up in the next 5 minutes or so. But anyway, if anybody's leaving, don't go out.
Okay.
Way through that door. We need to go out.
We'll finish up with these last two comments and we'll close it up then.
And our church is comprised of intergenerational. I think it's important to, like what you're saying, start with the basic of relationship. How many of our older members actually talk to the young people? How many of you know their names? How many of you know what grade they are? How many of you know their interests? How many of you know their likes? I think it's important for us to develop that relationship. And I think it's also important to encourage including them in the leadership positions, and also knowing their spiritual gifts and empowering them to actually be active in their churches. Because, like for me, I grew up in the Adventist church, and what kept me in the church are mentors, older people that encouraged me to, hey, let's have you start with Pathfinders. Let's have you become Pathfinder leaders. And then I then became a master guide and all that stuff. And all those things will help shape my Christian walk.
Amen. I will add one thing to that about leadership. How are the kids going to know how to lead a church if we don't let them help lead it? They've got to get exposed to leadership and church boards and how we do things and all that, because we need to teach them that. Please pass the mic down here. Thank you. We're going to finish up with this last question, and we'll call it a day.
I think we could take a lesson from Babel. Some of us might think, well, why in the world did God choose to confuse the languages? There was a purpose. Everybody was going in one direction, and that wasn't a good thing. God confused the languages to break that up and put people where they would best fit together and accomplish His purpose, and that was to spread abroad His word instead of their own.
Praise, brother. Amen. There's like several of y'all I'd love to take on tour with us. This is great stuff. Super great. All right, we're going to have to wrap it up. I'm sorry. You're going to do, okay, one more.
I should not be saying this, but I think I have to do it because I came from Maryland and just to attend this conference. I belong to a church where majority of us millennials, they left because of the music that the Alpha and the Generation Z were participating. It's loud music. Just like you said, in our church, we have drums, guitars, piano, organ, and their songs are repeatedly done. And half or more than half of the church members left. But we're still there because what we think about it is, and I'm glad, Pastor, that I attended because heaven is multi-generational. We came from the Philippines. I am in a black church. And most of these friends of ours, they left because of the music. And I'm so sad, but because we encourage our children, this is my child, they stayed in the church. But so many of the youth left the church because these old people, just like she said, they don't talk to the young people. They don't know them. They don't know their names. And they don't encourage them to participate in the activities of the church. What we hear is only negative. So I encourage my baby boomers and those who are older to don't judge the young people. Don't condemn them. And just like you said, Pastor, meet where they are because they will stay if you love them, just like Jesus said to us.
Amen. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what to do with all of this on Friday. Okay? Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to talk about what do our churches look like to others.